Hey, guys, get comfortable. Tonight, we're heading far from Rome's shining marble and noisy streets, way past the fancy senators and the poets with wine-stained togas. We're standing instead at the edge of the empire, a frozen outpost on the Rhine frontier, around the year 150 CE. Before we dive in, take a breath, get comfortable, and if you enjoy stories that bring the past to life, consider subscribing. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Share it in the comments. Now, let the world outside fade for a while, and let's begin our quiet journey through history. And right there, under a shivering sky full of stars, a small fire burns low. Its glow flickers across dull bronze armor and the tired face of a man named Marcus Flavius Severus. He's not a hero in any scroll. No statue bears his name. He's just one of the thousands of forgotten Roman soldiers who guarded the empire's ends, where civilization met the wild. And right now, Marcus is doing something every soldier has done since time began. He's waiting for dawn. The fire pops. Marcus pokes at it with a stick, muttering in Latin that's half curse, half prayer. He's counting, not the stars, not the coins in his purse. He doesn't have many, but the days since he last saw home. 73 or 74. He's not sure anymore. Home is hundreds of miles south, a little farm outside of Capua, where vineyards climb the hills and the air smells like olives and dust. He hasn't seen it in years. He joined the Legion thinking he'd serve 20 years, get his pension, maybe some land, and grow old in peace. That was the plan. The gods, however, loved to laugh at plans. He adjusts the metal plates on his shoulder, which clink quietly in the cold. The Rhine wind cuts through everything, even armor. His breath fogs in the air like smoke. He wraps his red cloak tighter in size. By Jupiter, he mumbles, "How can a man freeze and sweat at the same time?" That's Germania for you. The ground is half frozen. The trees black against the night. Beyond them, somewhere in the dark, are the tribes Rome never quite tamed. The Chatti, the Frisia, and others with names Marcus can't pronounce. To him, they're just those folks who scream too loud and throw spears too straight. It's not that he hates them. He doesn't. He's just tired. Tired of patrols that lead nowhere. Tired of missing pay. Tired of fighting for an empire that's forgotten where its borders even end. Back at the fire, his comrade Lucius stirs from his blanket, a younger man, with a face that still remembers laughter. Lucius squints at Marcus. "You're still awake? What are you doing, counting stars again?" Marcus shrugs. Someone's got to make sure the sky doesn't fall. Lucius groans, rolls over, and mutters something about old men who never sleep. Marcus chuckles. He's not that old, maybe late 30s. But out here, the winters add years faster than birthdays do. He sits in silence again, listening. The fort around him is quiet. A handful of huts, a wooden palisade, and a small tower where the night watch stands. Somewhere, a dog barks. The sound fades into the forest. You see, life at the edge of the empire wasn't glory. It was survival. Forget the grand triumphs, the parades, the golden eagles glinting in the sun. Out here, the empire's muscle was thin and tired. Men like Marcus guarded lines on a map that most Romans in the city didn't even know existed. They were the forgotten backbone of the empire, underpaid, overworked, and usually hungry. Their pay often came late. If it came at all, supplies went missing. Boots wore out faster than replacements arrived. Some nights, the soldiers joked that they'd have to start taxing the local squirrels for nuts just to get by. And yet, somehow, they kept showing up for duty. Because when the trumpet called at dawn, duty was all they had left. Marcus stares into the fire. The wood pops again, sending sparks spiraling up like tiny stars trying to escape. He remembers the last letter he got from home. His sister wrote it, short, polite, full of news about harvest and goats and the neighbor's wedding. But there was a single line that stuck in his mind. "You sound tired, brother. I hope Rome remembers you." Rome never remembers its soldiers, not the ones on the edges. The empire is too big, too busy. But still, Marcus smiles when he thinks of that letter. It smells faintly of olive oil and home. He keeps it tucked inside his armor, close to his heart, the only warmth that truly lasts. A gust of wind sweeps through the camp, scattering ashes and rattling the shields hung by the tents. Marcus looks up at the stars again. He's seen them from a dozen provinces, from Syria to Britannia, from Dacia to this cold slice of nowhere. Funny thing, the stars never change. No matter how far the empire stretches, they stay the same. That thought comforts him. The empire might rise and fall. Generals might come and go. But the sky, it just watches. He tosses another stick into the fire. All right, Jupiter, he mutters. If tomorrow's quiet, I'll offer a prayer. If it's not, well, you had your fun. Lucius groans again from his blanket. You talk too much to gods, old man. Marcus smirks. Someone's got to remind them we're still here. Lucius snorts and turns over. They've forgotten Marcus, just like Rome. Maybe, Marcus says softly, staring at the flames. But we haven't. The night deepens. The fire burns low. In the distance, a wolf howls, long, mournful, almost human. Marcus listens, and for a moment, he understands it. The wolf, the soldier, the boarder, all howling at the same indifferent sky. The sound fades. The Rhine keeps flowing, silent and black beyond the trees. Somewhere out there, unseen, another watchfire flickers. Maybe another Roman post, maybe a barbarian camp. Doesn't matter. Both sides share the same cold, the same hunger, the same fear of what waits in the dark. That's the funny thing about frontiers. They make enemies look more alike than either would admit. Finally, Marcus sighs and settles back, his armor creaking. The fire is small now, just embers glowing like dying stars. He feels sleep creeping in, slow and heavy. Last watchfire, he murmurs, half to himself. Let's make it last. And as the wind hums through the pines, Marcus drifts toward dreams of warmth and sunlight, vineyards and home. He doesn't know that history will never tell his name. He doesn't know that Rome itself will one day fall, and the forts will rot into the soil. But for tonight, on this quiet edge of the world, one soldier holds the line, and that's enough. Morning creeps slow over the Rhine frontier, a thin gray light melting through fog. The world feels half asleep, like it hasn't decided whether to wake up or just call it a day and start over tomorrow. Marcus sits beside the dying fire, hands outstretched for warmth that isn't really there. His armor's cold again. His knees ache like they always do before dawn. Somewhere nearby, a rooster that doesn't belong to anyone tries its best to sound like civilization. He chuckles to himself. Even the chickens out here are lost. The smell of smoke, wet earth, and boiled grain fills the air. Same breakfast every day. It's not exactly Rome, but it keeps you breathing. As he chews on a piece of stale bread, his thoughts wander south, far, far away, to the dusty roads near Capua, where life wants a color. That was before the armor, before the weight of duty pressed into his shoulders. Back then, he was just Marcus, son of a farmer, with hands made for olives and soil instead of shields and swords. His mother used to wake before sunrise, humming old songs while she crushed olives in a stone press. The air would be heavy with that sharp, sweet smell of oil, something pure, something alive. Marcus could almost hear it now, her voice floating over the fields, calling his name. Marcus, the sun won't wait for dreamers. He smiles faintly at the memory. His mother had the lungs of a goddess and the patience of none. Life on the farm was simple, hard but honest, the kind where you measured seasons by the way of the harvest, not by pay slips from generals. But simple doesn't last, not when Rome is everywhere. He remembers the first time a recruiter came through the village, dust all over his sandals, a shiny helmet catching sunlight like a beacon. The man had a mouth full of promises. "Serve Rome, lads," he'd said, voice big enough for the whole forum to hear. See the world, earn land, coin, and citizenship, be part of something eternal. And oh, How eternal it sounded. Marcus was maybe 18 then. Strong, restless, and tired of scraping a living from the dirt. The recruiter's words hit him like music. Adventure. Glory. A chance to belong to something bigger than olive trees and tax collectors. His mother had crossed her arms, staring at that recruiter like she could see through him, all the way to the graves behind the speeches. Eternal? She'd muttered. Rome's eternal. Maybe, but boys aren't. But Marcus didn't listen. None of them did. By the end of that week, 5 young men from the village had signed their names, or their best attempt at them, on wax tablets. They swore oaths, shaved their beards, and traded plows for spears. The world suddenly looked wide and golden. The recruiter handed each of them a single bronze coin, stamped with the emperor's face. Your first day's pay, he said. There'll be plenty more. Marcus kept that coin for years. He liked the way it gleamed, even when it wasn't worth much. To him, it meant he mattered. That first march south, toward the Legion camp, felt endless and thrilling. The road stretched straight and perfect, lined with milestones carved with Latin words he barely understood. He remembered the rhythm of boots hitting dust, dozens of men, all heading toward destiny. They slept in ditches, sang old songs, and told stories about the battles they'd fight. One man claimed he'd seen the ocean, blue as a god's eyes. Another swore he'd met a senator once, though none of them knew what senators actually did. For Marcus, every mile was a step away from home, and he felt both proud and scared. He'd never been so free and never so lost. He trained in Capua's auxiliary camp, a smaller version of the Great Legions. The drills were endless. March, turn, thrust, repeat. By night his feet bled. By morning they hardened. The centurion had a voice like thunder and eyes that could peel bark off trees. He yelled, cursed, threw sticks, and somehow made everyone better for it. Rome doesn't need farmers, the centurion had said. Rome needs walls of flesh and iron. You will be that wall. And for a while, Marcus believed it. He stood taller, spoke louder, and learned to walk like someone who owned the earth beneath his boots. The army gave him what the farm never could, a place in the grand machine of the empire. But the years passed. The glory wore thin. The pay never stretched far enough, and the promises of land turned vague and distant. Always, after your service ends, always just one more campaign. He fought in Britannia, freezing under skies even grayer than Germania's. He bled in Dacia, marched through Gaul, and buried friends in soil that wasn't his. And every time he looked at the emperor's face on a new coin, it was a different man's face. Eternal empire, changing heads. Now, sitting by the fading fire, Marcus laughs quietly at it all, a dry, honest sound. You got me good. Old recruiter, he says under his breath. You really did. Lucius, still half asleep beside him, cracks an eye. What's that? Nothing, Marcus replies. Just talking to the ghosts. Lucius grunts. They talk back. Sometimes. Usually when I'm out of wine. Lucius snickers and pulls the blanket over his head. Then you'll be hearing plenty of silence today. The morning mist lifts a little, revealing the outline of the fort. Crooked palisades, tired banners, the gray river crawling by. It's not much, but it's what they've got. Marcus pulls out a small leather pouch from under his cloak. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, is that same bronze coin from all those years ago. The emperor's face is worn smooth now, but he still carries it. He rubs it between his fingers, as if the metal could still speak. For a moment, it almost does. He imagines the recruiter's voice again, bright and full of certainty. Rome is eternal. Boy, you'll live forever through her. Marcus smiles faintly. Well, he murmurs, looks like we both got half of that right. He tucks the coin away and stands, stretching sore muscles. The camp is waking, men stirring, shields clinking, breath steaming in the cold. Another day guarding the edge of the eternal empire. But even now, with frost in his beard and miles between him and home, The echo of that old promise lingers in his heart, not for glory, not for Rome, but for the boy who once believed. There's a sound that never leaves you once you've served in a Roman legion. Not the clash of swords, not the trumpet of battle. No, it's the march. That endless rhythm of boots on the road. Dust rising, breath steady, metal groaning like an old song. It's the sound of men turning into machines. The sound of Rome moving. Marcus remembers it well. The long road north, out of Italia and into the wild. Day after day, line after line, the world reduced to footsteps and orders. The march began under the summer sun, when the roads baked like pottery and the air shimmered above the stones. They moved in columns, each soldier a cog in a great bronze wheel. First came the engineers with their shovels, setting up the day's path. Then the scouts, silent as shadows, checking ahead for ambushes or broken bridges. Behind them, the pack mules, loaded with tents, tools, rations, and enough rope to tie down Jupiter himself. And then the legion, 5,000 men in perfect order, shields slung, helmets glinting, sandals biting into the dirt. The centurions shouted the pace. The banners flooded in the sun, red, proud, heavy with heat. March, rest, march again. A life measured in miles. At first, it almost felt glorious. The young recruits joked, sang marching songs, traded insults that would make Vulcan blush. Marcus laughed with them, because laughter kept the blisters away. But as the days stretched into weeks, the songs faded. The road grew longer, the pack heavier. The shine of the armor dulled. The rhythm became survival. They crossed the fertile plains of northern Italia, where vineyards gave way to forests, and forests gave way to fog. The empire's marble faded behind them, replaced by wooden bridges, muddy roads, and the quiet, whispered trees that didn't speak Latin. There's something strange about marching through unknown lands. The world looks at you differently. The birds fall silent when your columns pass. The rivers watch but never welcome. By the time they reached the Alps, the laughter had stopped completely. The mountains rose like sleeping gods, snow glittering even in summer. The roads wound up and up until every breath burned. Mules slipped, men slipped. Sometimes, both disappeared into the white silence below. The officers ordered them not to look down, but every man did. Marcus remembered one evening when the column stopped near a narrow pass. He and a few others stood watching the sunset burn across the peaks. The sky on fire, the snow glowing pink. Lucius had muttered, "Feels like the gods are warning us." Marcus had nodded. "If they are, they're late." Past the mountains came the frontier forests, dark, endless, alive with whispers. The trees grew so tall they swallowed the light, their roots twisting like serpents underfoot. The air smelled of pine and wet soil, and something older than Rome itself. That was Germania, a world that didn't care about empires. The march slowed there. Road became trails. Trails became mud. Every sound seemed to carry. The clang of armor, the cough of a man, the creak of a cart. And sometimes, far off in the dark, came an echo, a shout, a horn, or just a voice that wasn't theirs. It set the men on edge. They began to talk less, listen more. You see, Rome's greatest weapon wasn't the sword. It was discipline. When one foot faltered, another stepped in line. When one man fell, two closed the gap. The road might break, but the march never stopped. Every evening, the same routine. Build a camp, dig the ditch, raise the wall, pitch the tents. Eat, sleep, wake, march. They built a fortress every night and tore it down every morning. That was the empire's rhythm, creation and destruction, over and over, until the land itself bent under it. Marcus often wondered if the gods were watching, or if even they were too tired to keep count. Some nights, around the campfires, the veterans told stories. One spoke of a fort lost in the woods, where the ghosts of old legions still marched at dusk. Another swore he'd seen faces in the mist, pale, silent, watching. Lucius didn't believe in ghosts. He said the only spirits in Germania came in wine jars, and they were never enough. But Marcus wasn't so sure. Sometimes, when the fog curled low and the moon hung thin as a blade, he could almost hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices that sounded like wind, but carried meaning all the same. Not words, just warning, like the land itself murmured. Go back! But Rome didn't go back. Rome only moved forward. Every road, every fort, every bridge they built pushed that invisible line of civilization a little further north. That was the empire's secret. Not just conquest, but connection. Stone by stone, road by road, they stitched the world together. The Via Flaminia, Via Claudia Augusta, Via Agrippa, lifelines of empire. And Marcus, with his aching feet and worn armor, was part of that living thread. A single heartbeat in the giant body of Rome. After months on the march, when the first sight of the Rhine finally appeared, wide, gray, and endless, the whole legion stopped. No one spoke. The air was cold and still, carrying the smell of iron and water. On the far bank lay Germania, shadowed, untamed, green as a secret. For a long moment, even the centurions were quiet. Lucius had looked at Marcus and whispered, "So that's it? The end of the world?" Marcus nodded slowly. "No," he said, "just the part no one writes about." They crossed on a wooden bridge built by earlier legions. Solid, scarred, eternal as anything man could make. Every plank creaked under their weight. Every ripple below looked like it wanted to pull them in. When they reached the other side, the world felt heavier. The forest closed, and again, the sun disappeared behind gray clouds. That night, as they built their new camp, Marcus stared at the river, watching the current carry bits of driftwood downstream. He thought about home, about his mother's olive press, about the recruiter's coin still tucked in his pack. And he thought about how far Rome had stretched itself, this grand, magnificent beast, feeding on miles and men. All that order, all that discipline, just to keep the dust and iron moving north. And so they marched, not heroes, not conquerors, just men walking through history's echo, each step carving the empire a little deeper into the world, each heartbeat beating for Rome, even when Rome was far too distant to hear. If you asked a poet in Rome what a soldier's life was like, he'd tell you about battles, banners snapping in the wind, bronze glinting in the sun, heroes shouting victory beneath eagle standards. But if you asked Marcus, he'd tell you the truth. A soldier's life? It's mostly waiting. Every day at the frontier fort starts the same, with the horn call slicing through the morning mist. A deep, lonely note that drifts over palisade and into every dream. Marcus always wakes before it, though. Habit, the kind that sticks to a man even after 20 years. He sits up, joints protesting, cloak damp with dew. Outside, Germania is gray and still. Smoke from the watchfires curls lazily into the sky. The fort looks more like a carpenter's yard than a fortress, half wood, half mud, with the smell of sweat and wet leather hanging in the air. He stretches, groans, and mutters, "Morning, eternal empire." No one answers. Rome is still asleep. Then comes the roll call. Lines of men, some barely awake, some already regretting being born. Armor clinks. Shields thud against the ground. The centurion stalks up and down the line, barking names, counting heads like he's checking for ghosts. Lucius, as usual, looks like he'd trade half his pay for 5 more minutes of sleep. "Eyes open, soldier," Marcus says. Lucius yawns. "They're open. Tell that to your feet. They're still dreaming." Lucius grins, eyes barely open. They dream of going home. The centurion glares. Then dream quieter, legionary. And the day begins. Drills. Always drills. Even at the edge of nowhere, the empire demands perfection. Form up. Advance. Retreat. Throw. Block. Turn. Repeat. The sound of wooden swords cracking against shields echoes across the cold air. Thump, 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 like the heartbeat of a tired giant. Marcus moves automatically, body remembering what his mind stopped thinking about years ago. The motions are smooth, practiced, the rhythm comforting, almost meditative. He's done this so long that it feels strange not to. When they finish, everyone's sweating, even in the chill. The centurion nods. "Good enough," he says, which is the closest thing to praise anyone's heard in months. Lucius whispers, "We're truly blessed." Marcus chuckles. "Save your gratitude for the gods. They've got more coins." After drills comes maintenance. The fort, like everything else, always seems to be falling apart. Walls need patching. Ditches need digging. Tools need sharpening. There's always something. Marcus joins a group repairing a section of palisade that last week's storm nearly flattened. Though it smells fresh, cut from the same forest that's been trying to reclaim this land for centuries. He hammers nails into place, each strike ringing out like a small act of defiance. "You think the forest ever gets tired of fighting us?" Lucius asks, hauling a plank. Marcus shakes his head. "No, it just waits." Lucius smirks. Smart forest. At midday they eat. The rations are the same every day. Bread hard enough to chip a tooth, cheese that could walk on its own, and porridge that could double as plaster. If they're lucky, there's meat, salted, chewy, possibly older than the fort itself. Lucius pokes at his portion. "You think this was ever alive?" Marcus shrugs. "Hard to say. Maybe it's immortal, like Rome." They both laugh. Quietly, because laughter makes even bad food go down easier. Around them, the fort hums with small noises. The buzz of flies, the clang of armor, the rhythmic scrape of whetstone sharpening blades that haven't been used in weeks. This is what an empire looks like when it's not fighting, not glory, not victory parades. Just men chewing in silence, waiting for orders that never change. Afternoons are for patrols. 2 miles out and back, through pine woods and wet grass. The same paths, the same trees, the same river that never runs out of secrets. Every snapping twig makes someone's hand twitch toward a sword. Every bird call makes someone glance over their shoulder. But mostly it's just quiet. Sometimes Marcus thinks the silence is the real enemy. It creeps in, fills your head, makes you remember things you'd rather forget. On the march back, Lucius hums a tune to break it. An old Roman marching song, badly out of tune but honest. Marcus joins in, voice low, steady. It's not music, not really, but it's something like belonging. When the sun finally starts to sink, the fort softens. Shadows stretch long across the walls. The men relax. Some gamble with worn dice. Others write letters they'll never send. A few sit by the fire, staring at nothing. Marcus likes these hours best. The quiet kind. The kind where the empire doesn't feel so heavy. He sits with Lucius near the watchfire, sharpening his sword that hasn't seen blood in years. The edge gleams faintly in the firelight. "You ever think about what we're really guarding?" Lucius asks. Marcus looks up. "You mean besides timber and mud?" Lucius nods. "Yeah, I mean, the wall, the border, all of it. Why here? Why us?" Marcus takes a long breath. "Because someone's got to stand between order and whatever's out there. Doesn't matter if it's glory or boredom. It's still the line." Lucius stares into the fire. "Feels like we built the line to trap ourselves." Marcus smiles faintly. "Maybe that's how Rome works. The walls keep things out and keep us in." Later, when the fort finally goes quiet, Marcus walks along the rampart. The night is cold, the forest black. The stars are sharp and far away. He looks out beyond the wall, that dark expanse of nothing, and for a moment, he wonders if the tribes beyond the river are watching him too, sitting by their own fires, wondering the same thing. Why do we fight to hold what neither side can keep? He doesn't know. Maybe no one does. All he knows is that tomorrow will look just like today. Drills, rations, patrols, repairs. The same rhythm, over and over, beating softly against the silence of the frontier. Wind rustles through the wooden palisade. The faint sound of an owl. The fire crackles. Empires, Marcus thinks, don't die in battles. They fade slowly, quietly, in places like this, in the spaces between wars, in the stillness where men grow old guarding nothing. He looks up at the stars again. Good night, eternal Rome, he murmurs. Sleep well. We'll keep watch. The forest had a sound of its own, a deep, breathing silence that never really stopped. At night, when the campfires burned low and even Lucius was too tired to joke, Marcus would sometimes walk the rampart and listen. The Rhine murmured softly in the distance. The trees whispered things only they understood. And beneath it all, sometimes came drums. Faint, far away, like a heartbeat on the other side of the world. He first heard them one night when fog hugged the fort like a ghost's breath. The sound came rolling through the mist, slow, rhythmic, steady. Thump, pause, thump. It was war drums. He knew those. This was different, older. Lucius had stumbled out of the barracks, rubbing his eyes. What's that? Thunder? Marcus shook his head. No storm tonight. They stood together in the cold, listening. The drums went on for a while, then faded into the trees. Lucius shrugged. Probably barbarians scaring their children. Marcus didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't sure who should be scared, their children or them. Over the next few nights, he began to notice other things. Torches glowing deep in the woods. Shapes moving through the fog. Sometimes faint voices carried on the wind, chanting in low tones, words that didn't sound human, though they were. The tribes beyond the river had their gods, he knew. Rome called them barbari, but their ways were old, older than marble temples and golden statues. The Romans built gods from order and stone. The tribes found theirs in storms and roots and rivers. One night, during patrol, Marcus caught a glimpse of them. They camped near the edge of the forest, close enough to see through the trees when the torches flared. A ring of figures stood around a fire, men and women both, cloaked in fur, faces painted with ash and earth. They swayed to the drumbeat, voices rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to blend with the wind itself. In the center of the circle stood a wooden post carved with strange runes, crowned with antlers. At its base, smoke and steam rose from something burning, herbs, maybe, or meat. Marcus watched, silent, transfixed. He didn't understand the words, but the feeling hit him, raw, alive, cold as iron. These weren't marble gods with polite priests and incense. These were wild gods, the kind that lived in thunderclouds and dark water, that didn't need temples to listen, the kind that saw everything. Lucius, beside him, whispered, "They're mad." "Maybe," Marcus said quietly, "or maybe they just still believe." Lucius frowned. "You saying we don't?" Marcus hesitated. "When's the last time you prayed and meant it?" Lucius thought for a moment. "When my boots started leaking." Marcus smiled faintly. "And did Jupiter fix them?" Lucius snorted. "No, but the quartermaster didn't either, so maybe Jupiter's on leave." They laughed softly, but it faded quick. The drums rolled on, echoing through the trees like the pulse of the earth. In Rome, faith was neat, organized, priests in white robes, temples tall as mountains. Here it was different. Here, faith breathed. Marcus started noticing it everywhere, in the way fog curled over the river, like smoke from an unseen altar, in the way lightning tore through the sky, as if the heavens themselves were speaking. He began to feel small again, not as a soldier, but as a man standing under something vast and untamed. It made him wonder about Rome's gods, Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, all those divine patrons who supposedly watched over them. Did they really? Could marble eyes see this far north? One evening, he sat by the fire, watching the sparks rise and vanish into the dark. The men around him played dice, argued, laughed, but Marcus's gaze stayed on the trees. He thought of the carved post he'd seen, antlers reaching toward the stars. He imagined the tribes bowing before it, asking their gods for strength, for rain, for mercy. He'd done the same once, in a temple back home, kneeling before a statue of Mars, pressing a coin to the altar before a campaign. He'd felt something then, pride, maybe fear, but not this. This northern faith felt heavier. It didn't promise victory. It promised endurance. Days later, while on patrol, they found the remains of one of those altars by the riverbank. A few stones, a carved wooden idol, and offerings left behind. Coins, food, and a small animal skull bleached white. Lucia spat. Savages. Marcus knelt, brushing frost from the idol. It was simple. 2 eyes, a mouth, no name. Just a face staring back at him from the wood. Patient, expressionless. He whispered, "Maybe not savages, just believers." Lucius shook his head. "You're thinking too much, old man." "Someone has to," Marcus murmured. That night, another storm rolled in, rain slashing the fort, wind howling like a god's laughter. The men cursed Jupiter, though Marcus wasn't sure Jupiter was listening anymore. He stood under the awning, watching the lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a figure standing in the storm, tall, cloaked, unmoving. A trick of the light, maybe, or maybe not. The next flash came, and it was gone. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Cold gods," he whispered. "You really don't sleep, do you?" The thunder answered, distant but clear. After that night, the forest seemed quieter. Or maybe Marcus just stopped trying to explain it. He still prayed, out of habit more than hope. But sometimes when he did, the words came out wrong. Not Avenue Jupiter, not Mars Victor. Something older, simpler. He'd look up at the trees and just nod, as if the world itself was listening. Wind rises again. Drums fade in very faint. The fire pops. Empires believe they bring civilization to the wild. But the wild has its own civilization. One older than Rome, older than stone, older than memory. Marcus realized that maybe the tribes weren't fighting Rome. Maybe they were defending something Rome could never own. The kind of faith that doesn't need walls. As the drums faded into the night, he closed his eyes and whispered, not to Jupiter, not to any god in marble, but to the cold ones in the dark. "Keep the fire burning," he said softly, "for both of us." Thunder rolls once more, then silence, soft crackle of fire. Wind hums faintly outside the wooden walls. Cool scratching sound. Marcus warmed his hands over the oil lamp. The flame danced, tiny and stubborn, fighting the chill that crept through the cracks of fort. He had the wax tablet open on his knee, the stylus hovering above the surface. For hours he'd stared at it, thinking of words that refused to come. Then finally he sighed and whispered, "All right, let's try again." He pressed the stylus to the wax. "Dear mother," he began. He stopped. The words looked foreign. He hadn't written to her in years, not properly. The Army's couriers only went south every few months, and most of the time the letters vanished somewhere along the way. But tonight, it didn't matter if it ever reached her. He just needed to write. He started again. "Dear mother, it's still cold here. Colder than I remember anything being. The river freezes so thick the carts roll over it, and even the mules look offended about it. I think you'd laugh if you saw me bundled up like some mountain goat. My armor feels like an icebox." He smiled faintly as he wrote. "We eat the same stew every night. Barley, beans, and whatever the cook claims is pork. I think he's lying, but I eat it anyway. You'd tell me to stop complaining. I know. You always did." The flame flickered and his smile faded. He scratched the stylus again, slower now. "I remember the olive trees, the smell when the fruit was ripe. I remember your hands stained black from pressing oil. You said that oil was Rome's blood, the thing that kept the lamps burning. You were right. But out here, mother, I think the lamps are going out." He stared at the words, feeling their weight. Outside, wind rattled shutters. Somewhere down the barracks, a soldier coughed in his sleep. The next letter came a few nights later. The snow had piled against the walls, and the world had gone quiet. This one was for his brother. "Dear Publius," he wrote, "you like the men here. Most of them are idiots, but honest idiots. Lucius still owes me a month's pay after losing a dice game, and he insists the gods rigged it. I told him if the gods care about dice, Rome's really in trouble." He chuckled under his breath. "The truth is, I think I've forgotten what normal feels like. I wake up to the same horns, the same drills, the same gray sky. The days all blend together. Sometimes I wonder if we're protecting the empire, or if we're just keeping it company." He paused, tapping the stylus against the wax. "They say we fight for Rome's glory, but I've seen the glory. It's a word carved into a general statue, while men like us freeze in the mud to keep it shiny. Maybe that's just how it works. You polish the marble with your bones." He sighs. Wind outside grows louder. A wolf howls faintly in the distance. He stopped writing. The wax tablet gleamed under the lamplight, smooth and dark. He whispered, "You're getting too poetic, old man." Lucius's voice came from the next cot. "Talking to your tablet again, Marcus?" Marcus smirked. "It listens better than you do." "Good. Maybe it'll start paying attention during drills." "Doubt it," Marcus said. "It's smarter than that." Lucius snored before Marcus could reply. The fort fell back into silence, that thick, heavy kind that only winter knows how to make. Weeks passed. The letters piled up, thin wooden tablets stacked neatly in a small box by his bedroll. Some were addressed to people he hadn't seen in decades. One for an old friend who died in Parthia. One for the girl he almost married. One just titled to Rome. That one started simply, "You don't know me, but I've carried your banner most of my life. I've seen your power, your marble, your promise. But out here, far from your fires, you feel less like a mother and more like a memory. Maybe that's what all great cities become. Stories people tell themselves so they can keep marching." He stopped there. It felt dangerous to write too much. Rome had a long reach, even to the edges of the map. Sometimes he'd imagine the letters arriving, the courier stumbling through the streets of Capua, handing them off at the old olive farm, his mother opening one, squinting at the neat lines, laughing softly at his complaints. But then the image would fade, replaced by the cold truth. She might not even be alive anymore. News traveled slower than snow melted. Still, he kept writing, because every word was a small rebellion against forgetting. Every sentence said, "I'm still here." Soft music, a single flute, faint and distant. One night, the commander passed through the barracks, checking on the men. He paused at Marcus's cot and noticed a stack of tablets. "Letters?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Something like that." "You should send them." Marcus smiled gently. "They're not finished." The commander studied him for a moment, then said, "None of ours ever are," and walked away. Marcus watched him go, the words echoing long after the footsteps faded. That winter stretched endlessly. Food grew scarce. Fires burned low. And still Marcus wrote, not every night. Sometimes a cold one, but enough to keep the silence from swallowing him whole. He began to write not to anyone specific, but to himself. "Dear whoever finds this," one letter began, "the world is smaller than we think, but loneliness makes it endless. If you ever find yourself far from home, don't wait for letters. Write them anyway, even if no one reads them, especially if no one reads them." By early spring, the first thaw came. Snow turned to mud, and the camp came alive again with noise and shouting and repairs. Marcus gathered his letters one morning and stared at them for a long time. Then, one by one, he tied them with twine, placed them in a clay jar, and sealed it with wax. He carried it to the edge of the fort and buried it near the old wall, where the frost still lingered. Lucius spotted him and called out, "Burying treasure?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Something like that." "What is it?" "Things I meant to say." Lucius grinned. "Well, Hope the gods can read. Marcus chuckled. If they can't, I'll teach them. Soft fade, wind easing, birds faint in the distance. Years later, someone might dig up that jar. Maybe a farmer, maybe a child playing in the ruins. They'd find the tablets, the writing faded, the words cracked but still there. Maybe they'd read them and think, someone lived here once, someone who missed home, someone who loved, someone who dreamed of olive trees. And maybe that would be enough. The kind of immortality a soldier never expects, but always hopes for. The sound of a quill scratching fades out. Then stillness, wind, the soft crunch of boots on frozen ground. Somewhere far off, a crow calls. The frost had come early that year. The river lay under a crust of ice, the trees glistening white like 1,000 tiny blades. Marcus woke before dawn to the usual stillness, the kind that makes you feel the world is holding its breath. He pulled on his cloak, still damp from yesterday's snow, and went to the wall for his shift. The horizon was pale gray, bleeding into mist. Lucius joined him, yawning. If this cold gets any worse, I'm deserting south. Marcus smiled faintly. You said that yesterday. Yeah, but today I mean it. The two men leaned on their spears, watching the forest breathe in the distance. Everything looked the same, calm, still, harmless. Then the world changed in a heartbeat. It started with the horn, one long, low note that rattled the air. Marcus's body moved before his mind caught up. He grabbed his helmet, shouting for Lucius, for anyone awake. The next horn blast came sharper, desperate. Then the sound of hooves. Shadows burst from the tree-line. Figures, dozens of them, sprinting across the frozen field. Fur cloaks whipping behind them, spears gleaming like teeth. The Germanic tribes had come in the half-light, silent until the moment they weren't. 2 arms, someone screamed. To the wall. The fort exploded into motion. Men scrambled from the barracks, half-dressed, clutching shields and gladii. Marcus took the rampart, shouting orders that dissolved into the wind. Arrows flew. Some found their mark, some didn't. The first raiders hit the gate with a crash that shook the timber. Spears jabbed through the cracks. Someone fell beside Marcus, an arrow through the throat. He didn't look down. Lucius was beside him now, shield raised. They're testing the wall. Marcus nodded, breath steaming. Then let's fail the test. They pushed forward, stabbing down at the attackers below. The air was full of noise, metal on wood, shouting, the deep thud of impact. Then, suddenly, the gate splintered. The raiders poured through like water through a broken jar. It wasn't a battle. It was madness. Clothes dirty, fast. Marcus fought without thinking. Thrust, block, pivot, repeat. Training taking over where thought failed. He slipped once on the frozen mud and nearly lost his footing. A spear grazed his side, cutting deep through the cloak. He didn't feel the pain yet, only the weight of survival pressing on him. Lucius fought near the well, his face pale but fierce. "Get behind me," he yelled. Marcus barked a laugh. "You're half my size." Lucius grinned. "Then they'll never see you." The words were still in the air when the axe came down. Lucius turned too late. The blow split his helmet clean, like striking wood. He fell without sound. Time stopped. Marcus froze, just for a heartbeat, staring at his friend's body. Then rage filled the silence. He roared, swinging his sword with both hands, driving the attacker back into frost. 1 strike. 2. 3. When it was over, Marcus was standing in blood that steamed against the cold. The sound fades, now just wind, breathing in the soft drip of melting ice. The fight ended as fast as it had begun. The raiders pulled back, leaving behind their dead and roams. The forest swallowed them again, silent, indifferent. Marcus staggered through the wreckage, chest heaving. The fort smelled of iron and smoke. A few men groaned on the ground. Others sat in shock, eyes blank. He found Lucius where he'd fallen, still unmoving, a half-smile frozen on his lips. Marcus knelt beside him, hand trembling as he closed his eyes. "You said you desert south," he whispered. "Guess you made it first." He tried to laugh, but it came out like a cough. The commander's voice broke through the silence. "Gather the wounded. Check the walls. Move, men." Marcus didn't move. Not right away. He sat there, watching the steam rise from the blood-soaked ground. The frost had turned red in places. Like the earth itself had been wounded. It struck him how quickly it all ended. Hours ago, they were joking about stew and frozen boots. Now half of them were gone. The Empire called these skirmishes, as if small words could make small deaths. But every man lost left a hole that didn't freeze over. Later, after the wounded were carried off and the fires dimmed, Marcus cleaned his blade in silence. The blood flaked off easily in the cold. He sat on the rampart, the same spot where dawn had found him that morning, the same horizon, the same wind, only quieter now, too quiet. He stared at the forest line, where the raiders had come from, and wondered if they were sitting by their own fires now, mourning their own dead. Somewhere out there, a mother would never see her son again. Neither would Rome's. Different gods, same grief. Soft snow begins to fall, each flake hitting like a whisper. Marcus took off his helmet and looked up at the sky. It was gray, heavy, endless. He thought about what the priests in Rome said, that dying in service to the Empire was the greatest honor. Looking at Lucius, he didn't feel any honor, just cold. He whispered, "If this is glory, the gods can keep it." The snow didn't answer, but it kept falling. By nightfall, the fort was patched up, the wounded tended. Life resumed in that strange, mechanical way soldiers learn. Fix what's broken, bury what's gone, eat if you can. Marcus stood by the pyre as they burned the dead. The flames licked upward, orange against the white world. Someone began a prayer, but the words sounded thin. The wind carried them away before they reached the stars. When it was done, Marcus stayed behind. He picked up a handful of ash and let it fall between his fingers. "Rest easy, brother," he said. "You finally got warm." Silence. Only wind and fire crackling faintly. In the morning, the frost returned. It covered the ground again, smooth, clean, pretending nothing had happened. The blood was gone, hidden beneath a new sheet of white. But Marcus could still see it. Always would. He tightened his cloak and looked out over the quiet field, where the snow stretched unbroken toward the forest. Rome would call it victory. The frost called it something else. A soft gust of wind. The fire dies out, fade to silence. Soft morning wind. The faint rhythmic clang of hammers. Birds returning after snow. The battle was over. The frost had melted, and in its place mud. Thick, cold, endless mud that swallowed boots and dreams with equal hunger. Marcus stood in it up to his ankles, shovel in hand, staring at what was left of the wall. The fort looked like a broken tooth, jagged, missing pieces, leaning tired against the gray sky. The commander wanted it rebuilt before the next moon. Rome had rules. Rome always had rules. So they got to work. The first days were just clearing wreckage. Burned timber, shattered shields, half-frozen blood in the dirt. The kind of mess no historian writes about. Lucius's ashes were still in the corner near the pyre, sealed in a clay urn. Marcus caught himself looking at it sometimes, as if waiting for one last joke. But the urn stayed quiet. The men didn't talk much either. They just worked. Shovel, lift, drop, hammer, nail, breathe. A rhythm, like the army's heartbeat starting up again after being stopped. By midday, the mud had claimed everything. Their boots, their tempers, their pride. Rome, one soldier muttered, swinging a hammer, wasn't built in a day. Another snorted. Yeah, but it sure feels like it's being rebuilt every damn one. Marcus chuckled. Keep talking, it'll go faster. The man grinned through the sweat. If that's true, I'll start singing. Please don't, Marcus said. We've suffered enough." They laughed, soft and short, the sound carrying through the fog like a small mercy. Rebuilding wasn't glorious. It was quiet punishment. They mixed mortar from sand and crushed stone, chopped wood from a nearby forest, repaired what could be saved, and buried what couldn't. Every wall they raised felt like a scar healing over. Marcus worked slower now, his side still aching from a battle wound. But he refused rest. Moving meant thinking less. Each strike of the hammer steadied him, a dull, repeating promise that life still moved forward, even if it didn't make sense. Hammer rhythm continues faintly in the background. At night, when the others slept, Marcus would sit by the fire, staring at his hands. Blisters had layered over old scars, the story of a lifetime told in calluses. He used to think soldiers were made of iron, but the truth was simpler. They were made of flesh, mud, and stubbornness, and that was what held the empire together. Not marble, not senators, just hands. Hands that swung hammers, raised walls, built roads, dug graves, and never stopped moving. One morning, the commander rode to the work site, cloak fluttering behind him. He stopped his horse near the wall, where Marcus was setting new planks. "Veteran Flavius," he called. "You've rebuilt before?" Marcus nodded. "Once. Britannia. Fort Vindolanda." The commander scanned the horizon. "You'll oversee this section then. Make it strong. We can't afford another breach." Marcus saluted with the handle of his shovel. "It'll stand, sir. Mud's cheaper than marble, but it holds just as well if you care enough." The commander almost smiled. "That's the spirit Rome needs." As he rode off, Marcus whispered under his breath, "Then Rome must be very tired." Sound of rain starting, soft, persistent. The next few days were wet. The sky couldn't decide between rain and sleet, so it gave them both. Mud turned to soup. Shields sank. Tools vanished beneath the surface. But the men kept working, muttering curses that might have made Jupiter blush. One young recruit slipped face first into the muck. When he stood up, dripping brown from chin to boots, Marcus grinned. "Congratulations! You're officially part of the wall now." The recruit wiped his eyes. "Sir, permission to desert?" "Denied," Marcus said. "You're too useful as camouflage." Even the commander laughed at that one. By the second week, the fort began to look like itself again. Straight lines, fresh timber, a little less ruin, a little more Rome. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was as far north, but it stood. The men took pride in that. Quiet pride. The kind that doesn't need trumpets or parades. They'd bled on this ground. Now they'd built on it. And somehow, that felt more sacred than any altar in the city. One evening, as the rain finally stopped, Marcus sat on the rampart and watched the sky turn silver over the trees. A few birds circled the river. Smoke drifted from the rebuilt watchtower. He felt peace, maybe, or something close to it. He thought of Rome again, of her senators, her marble halls, her clean sandals that never stepped in mud like this. They'd never know what it took to hold the line. But maybe that was fine. Maybe that ignorance was the reason Rome still believed in its own eternity. Let them think the empire was made of marble. He knew the truth. It was made of mud, and the men who refused to let it sink. Soft hammer strikes again, slow, steady, fading into heartbeat rhythm. When night came, Marcus joined the others around the fire. They passed bread, shared a skin of sour wine, laughed about nothing in particular. For a moment, the war felt far away. A young soldier new to the Legion asked him, "Sir, you ever think about home?" Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. "Every day." The boy nodded. "What's it like?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Warmer." They both laughed quietly. Then the boy said, "Do you think Rome will ever stop fighting?" Marcus thought for a long time before answering. "Maybe, but not while there's mud to build on." Later that night, after the camp went quiet, Marcus walked to the wall again. The moonlight shone on the wet timber, the rebuilt gate, the clean tools laid out for morning. He pressed a hand against the wood, solid, rough, real. He whispered, "Stay standing." Then softer, "So will I." The wind carried his words across the river, into the dark trees. Maybe even the cold gods of the north were listening. The last sound is a single hammer strike echoing once, then silence. Soft crackle of a campfire. The wind hums gently through wooden walls. Faint horse bells approach. It began with the sound of bells. Not Roman horns, not marching feet, but the soft, irregular jingle of metal against leather drifting through the fog. The guards at the gate raised their torches. Out of the gray morning came a small caravan. 3 mules, 1 wagon, and a man wrapped in layers of cloth that shimmered faintly like oil on water. A stranger, a trader, from the east. The commander allowed him through. Frontier forts saw all sorts of wanderers, smugglers, and dreamers. But this man was different. His name was Samir, and he claimed to have come from Antioch, though his tongue carried more lands than one. His skin was sun-dark, his beard neat and black, his eyes the color of roasted almonds. Behind him, his wagon was filled with impossibilities, rolls of silk that caught the firelight like liquid stars. Tiny pouches of crushed spice that smelled of cinnamon, clove, and something no Roman could name. Little glass bottles of perfume from Arabia, sealed with wax and mystery. Coins from cities whose names Marcus couldn't even pronounce. The fort had seen merchants before, local traders, peddlers of fur and salt, but never this. Never someone who smelled like summer while the land still froze. That night, the trader sat with the soldiers by the fire. He poured them wine that tasted faintly of honey and smoke, and the men listened like children around a storyteller. Marcus sat at the edge of the circle, silent, watching. Samir spoke of Palmyra, the city of palms where camels crossed the desert carrying silk from Serica, the land the Romans only whispered of, far beyond the Parthian kings. He spoke of India, where spices grew on trees, and the air was heavy with sweet smoke, of cities by the sea that smelled of fish, incense, and rain. He told them that beyond mountains and storms, there were lands where the people wrote without ink, painted their stories with brushes of hair, and drank tea instead of wine. The men laughed, shaking their heads. Stories, one said, fairy tales. But Marcus didn't laugh. He leaned forward. What are they called? The people beyond the mountains? Samir smiled. We call them the Silk People. You call their land Sinai. China, a word Marcus had only ever seen scratched faintly in the margins of an old map back in Capua. He whispered again, as if afraid it might disappear. China? The trader noticed his interest. You've never seen silk before? He asked. Marcus shook his head. Not this kind. Rome has it, but only for the rich. The senators, their wives. We get wool, leather, iron. Samir nodded knowingly. And blood. Marcus looked at him. A fair trade for empire. The trader's smile faded a little. Does it feel fair to you? Marcus didn't answer. As the night deepened, the men grew drowsy, their laughter fading into quiet murmurs. Only Marcus and the trader remained awake, the fire now a low orange glow. Samir reached into his cloak and pulled out a small pouch. From it, he drew a handful of dark red seeds. Cloves, he said, from the islands beyond India. They burn away sickness, sweeten breath, and keep dreams gentle. He handed Marcus one. Marcus rolled it between his fingers. It was smooth, oddly light. He held it near his nose. The scent was sharp and sweet, like warmth made solid. He smiled faintly. It smells alive. The trader chuckled. Everything from the east smells alive, because we still listen to the world before we sell it. They sat in silence for a while. The wind moved through the fort like a slow breath. The wooden walls creaked. Then Marcus spoke softly. Does Rome reach that far? Samir tilted his head. Your empire reaches far enough to buy, but not far enough to understand. Marcus looked into the fire. Maybe we don't need to. Maybe not. said Samir. "But someday, when the roads end, you'll wonder what lies beyond them. That's when you'll understand why we keep walking." Soft instrumental hum. The sound of crackling spice tossed into the fire. Faint pops and hisses. Samir threw a pinch of spice into the flames. The smoke that rose was blue and sweet, swirling like incense. Marcus closed his eyes. For a moment, the scent carried him, beyond the fort, beyond Germania, across deserts and cities and seas he'd never see. He imagined markets where the air shimmered with heat and color, where the walls glowed red under the sun, and where no one spoke Latin, but everyone understood trade. He imagined standing in a place where Rome was just a story told by someone else. For a moment, he felt free. The next morning, the trader was gone. No one saw him leave. The wagon tracks led south for a while, then vanished into the forest. The commander said nothing, just told the men to return to their duties. But Marcus went to the spot where the caravan had stood. There, half buried in the mud, he found one of the red clove seeds. He picked it up, turning it in his hand, then tucked it into his pouch beside a small piece of broken gladius, a reminder of battle, now joined by a reminder of peace. That night, as the wind howled against the walls, Marcus took out the seed again. He held it near the firelight, watching how it caught the glow, small, unremarkable, yet carrying half the world within it. He smiled faintly to himself. Maybe Rome wasn't the center of the world after all. Maybe it was just one fire among many, flickering on the edge of a vast darkness. And maybe, somewhere out there, another soldier was staring into his own fire, dreaming of Rome. Soft flute music fades in, a tune not Roman, not known, carried from another world. The empire stretched far, farther than even Caesar had dreamed. But beyond every border, there were still traders, stories, and seeds waiting to be found. Marcus lay back on his cot, the scent of spice still faint on his hands. For the first time in months, his dreams were warm. Low wind, snow hissing against wooden walls, the faint creak of frozen leather. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell before the last leaves had even turned. By the time December rolled around, the world beyond the palisade was a silent ocean of white. No birds, no traders, no sound but the crack of trees splitting in the frost. The Rhine had frozen solid, a silver road leading nowhere. At first, the men joked about it. They'd shovel snow from the walls, huddle around the fires, trade stories about the winters back home. "You think this is cold? You've never seen the hills above Capua." But the laughter didn't last long. The supply wagons never came. A rumor drifted through the fort like smoke. Something about a delay in funds, about grain shipments redirected to another province. Someone in Rome had miscounted, misfiled, or just didn't care. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Empty storerooms, thin rations, men whose belts tightened one hole at a time. Marcus sat one night in the barracks, staring at his bowl. It was mostly broth, a thin brown water with 2 floating barley grains and what might have once been meat. Across from him, Publius scraped his bowl with a spoon like he could dig flavor out of wood. "You ever think," Publius muttered, "that Rome forgot we're out here?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Days turned into weeks. The men stopped polishing their armor. No point when rust spread faster than oil. Drills were shorter, slower. Even the centurion stopped shouting. His voice had grown weak, his cough worse by the day. One morning, they found him still sitting upright on his cot, eyes open, hand frozen around a wax tablet. He'd been writing a report. Marcus took it from his fingers. It ended mid-sentence. Supplies dwindling. Morale. And then nothing. The fort's doctor, an old Greek named Theon, tried to keep order. But what could he do? He had no herbs, no wine, no linen. Just a few dull scalpels and the stubborn will of a man who'd seen too much death to stop fighting it. He told Marcus, "Starvation is a slow thief. It doesn't come kicking down the door. It just steals you piece by piece. And he was right. First went the laughter, then the color, then the names of the men who stopped waking up. One night, a small argument broke out by the kitchen pit. Two soldiers accused another of stealing dried beans from the ration crate. The accused swore he hadn't. The others swore they'd seen him. By morning, all three were gone. One body found near the ditch, the other two missing. No one spoke about it again. The snow piled higher. The world felt smaller. Marcus spent his nights by the dying watchfire, clutching his cloak tighter. He thought about home, his mother's olive trees bending under warm sun, the smell of crushed fruit and wet soil. He thought about the recruiter's promise. Serve 20 years and you'll have land, citizenship, honor. Now, 20 years later, he had frostbitten fingers, a scar on his shoulder, and no land but the patch of frozen mud beneath him. He started keeping a tally on the barack wall, one line for each man lost of hunger or sickness. At first, he made the marks neatly, counting them each evening. But by midwinter, the tally blurred together, a black scar against the timber. He stopped counting when it passed 30. Then came the cough. Not just one man's, but half the fort. It spread like smoke in the cold, a hacking, wheezing sound that never stopped. Men coughed until their throats bled, until their ribs ached from shaking. Thean said it was fever from spoiled grain. Marcus thought it was Rome itself, rotting from inside. In February, the commander called what was left of the cohort together. Maybe 50 men, where once there'd been 200. He stood before them, pale, eyes sunken. He said, "Hold fast. Reinforcements will come." No one believed him, but everyone nodded anyway. That night, Marcus sat by the fire with what remained of his rations, a crust of bread so hard it could have been carved from stone. He turned it over in his hands for a while, before breaking it in half and giving the larger piece to Publius. "You'll need it," Marcus said. Publius shook his head weakly. "You keep it." Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm not hungry." He was starving, but the lie made the silence warmer. A few days later, a patrol found a wagon half buried in snow 5 miles south. The oxen were dead, frozen stiff in their harnesses. Inside the wagon, sacks of grain. They hauled it back to the fort, cheering weakly. For the first time in months, hope flickered again. But when they opened the sacks, the grain was black and crawling. Rotten. The laughter stopped mid-breath. That night, Marcus dreamed of the trader again, of spices and sunlight, and a world where the air didn't freeze in your lungs. He woke with the scent of cloves still in his mind, like a ghost from another life. He sat up, rubbed his hands together, and stared into the dim fire. "How many men starve while senators argue over tables of numbers?" he whispered. "How many names will never reach Rome?" No one answered. The wind did, though, moaning softly through the cracks like a dying song. By late March, the snow began to melt. The first birds returned, timid and thin. But the fort was nearly empty now. The survivors little more than shadows wrapped in armor. When the supply wagons finally arrived, it was too late for most. The new commander looked around at the ruined fort, the graves half buried under thawing ice, and said only, "Rome will be informed." Marcus said nothing. He just looked toward the horizon, where the river still shimmered faintly with ice. Soft, slow music fades in a low cello hum, like breath in winter air. Rome was eternal, they said, but eternity was built on men who starved quietly while waiting for orders that never came. Marcus wrapped his cloak tighter and walked the rampart one last time. The wind carried the faintest hint of spring, but he no longer trusted promises. Not of warmth, not of Rome, not of gods. He whispered, "Hold fast," and almost laughed, because that's all they ever did. Music fades. The last sound, the wind and the slow creak of a gate swinging in the cold. Low hum of wind, water lapping against ice. The sound of breath, slow, shallow. The river had thawed, but the mist stayed. Each morning it rolled in from banks, thick and white, swallowing the fort until only the tops of the towers showed above it like islands in a cloud. The men said it was just fog. Marcus wasn't so sure anymore. He'd started seeing things in it, shapes, shadows, movement that didn't belong. Sometimes he thought he saw soldiers walking the palisade, even though half the men were dead. Sometimes he'd look down into the water and see faces drifting just below the surface. Pale, open-eyed, mouths moving like they were still trying to speak. The first time, he dropped his helmet in shock. Theon, the old doctor, found him standing there afterward, staring into the fog. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Theon said. Marcus just nodded slowly. "I think I have." The doctor smiled wearily. "They're only memories, Marcus. The brain's a tricky beast. It pulls the past into the present when the present gets too heavy." But when Marcus blinked, he swore the fog rippled, like something inside had moved away, slowly, watching him go. At night, the mist crept through the cracks in the barracks walls. It hung low, clinging to the floor like breath from the dead. The men started whispering again. They said the river spirits were angry, that the gods of the north wanted payment for every tree the Romans had cut, every hill they carved into roads, every soldier buried in frozen soil without proper rites. Marcus wanted to laugh at the superstition. He really did. But when the wind carried voices across the dark, faint, distant, familiar, he didn't laugh. He just listened. One night, he woke to the sound of boots crunching outside. He sat up, heart pounding, and saw a figure moving near the gate, tall, broad-shouldered, armor glinting faintly. "Publius." Marcus called softly. The figure turned its head. For a moment the fog thinned, and Marcus saw his friend's face. Pale, empty-eyed. The same face he'd buried weeks ago. Then the mist swallowed it again. In the morning, Marcus found footprints near the gate, half melted, leading nowhere. Theon shook his head. Dreams. The mind eats itself when it's too lonely. Marcus didn't argue, but that night he slept with his sword beside him, not out of fear, out of recognition. He began seeing others too, not just comrades, but strangers. A woman in rough furs, standing by the riverbank, her hair tangled with frost. A child sitting cross-legged in the mud, playing with stones. When Marcus tried to speak to them, they didn't move. They only looked at him with the kind of patience that made him uneasy, like they'd been waiting for him to see them. Once he whispered, "What do you want?" The woman smiled faintly. "To be remembered." The next blink, she was gone. The dreams grew worse. He dreamed of marching again, endless miles of road stretching through snow and forest. But when he looked down at his boots, there were bones instead of legs. When he looked behind, there were no men, only shadows marching in perfect silence. He woke gasping, his breath misting in the cold air, heart thundering like drums from another life. Outside, the river murmured softly. He could have sworn it was whispering his name. Theon tried to keep him grounded. "Talk to me," the old man said one morning. "What do you see when you close your eyes?" Marcus hesitated. Faces. Fires. Men who should be gone. Theon sighed. They called the battle fever. Seen it before in soldiers from the east. You fight too long, lose too many, and the mind starts inventing company. Marcus frowned. "And if it's not the mind?" Theon gave a tired smile. "Then you're a lucky man. Most of us don't get to see what waits on the other side." That night, Marcus sat by the river again. The mist curled around his boots, cold and soft as breath. He spoke into it, quietly. "If you're real, if you're still here, I'm sorry." The mist shifted, and for a heartbeat, he saw them again, his fallen brothers, standing knee-deep in the water, their faces calm, their eyes gentle. One raised a hand in silent salute. Marcus blinked, and the vision broke apart, only fog drifting. He stayed there until dawn, staring into nothing, the apology still warm in his mouth. When spring finally arrived, it didn't bring joy, just rain, endless, Gray rain that turned the fort into a swamp and the graves into shallow pools. The river ran higher, faster, washing away the snow, and with it, the ghosts. Marcus watched them go, standing alone on the bank. He half expected to feel relief, but what came instead was quiet sorrow. They'd kept him company, in their way. Now, even they were leaving. One evening, Theon joined him. Still watching the mist? The doctor asked. Marcus nodded. It feels empty without them. Theon looked out at the water. You know, the tribes here believe the river keeps the souls of the lost until the living stop calling their names. Marcus smiled faintly. Then I'll keep calling. Soft music fades and faint flute and low hum, like wind through reeds. The Empire believed in marble gods and written prayers. But out here, at the edge of the world, it was the fog that listened, the river that remembered. Marcus stayed there until the stars came out, just him, the water, and the soft curl of mist dancing across the current. For a moment, he thought he heard laughter, light familiar, carried downstream. He smiled. Maybe the ghosts weren't gone. Maybe they were just moving on ahead. Sound fades. Gentle ripples. A whisper wind. One last breath before silence. Soft morning wind. Faint clatter of hooves and mud. The rhythmic creak of a wagon. News came late, as it always did. A rider appeared one morning out of mist, his cloak heavy with road dust, his horse limping for miles too many. He carried a scroll sealed with wax, stamped with an eagle that had long lost its shine. He asked for the commander. Marcus almost laughed. The commander had died 2 months ago, quietly, halfway through a prayer. But the messenger insisted, so they gave the scroll to the next man in line, a centurion with one good eye and not much patience. He broke the seal, unrolled the parchment, and squinted. Then he said flatly, Rome has a new emperor. No one cheered. A few men looked up from their work, waiting for more. None came. Marcus kept stacking firewood, the axe swinging in slow, steady rhythm. A new emperor. Another one. The last one hadn't lasted 2 winters. At mess that evening, the talk started, as it always did when the capital shifted thrones. Who is he? Someone asked. Antoninus something, another muttered. Adopted by the last one, I think. Does he pay soldiers? That's what they all say. Laughter, soft and bitter. Someone raised a mug. To the emperor who doesn't know our names. The men clinked cups. The wine was sour, but the toast was good. Later that night, Marcus sat by the gate, staring out toward the river. The sky was clear for once, stars sharp as spear points. He thought about Rome, hundreds of miles south, marble halls, golden domes, senators arguing about provinces they'd never see, and somewhere among them, a man who wore the title Imperator. Marcus tried to picture him. A young face, maybe a fine cloak, hands too clean to know what frostbite felt like. A man worshipped by millions. And yet to Marcus, he was just a name carried on tired paper. The next morning, the fort held a small ceremony. Protocol, nothing more. The centurion read aloud from the scroll, his voice flat. By decree of the Senate and will of the gods, Antoninus Pius, son of the divine Hadrian, now reigns as Emperor of Rome. Then he ordered the men to salute. They did, arms raised, faces expressionless. The wind blew cold across the yard, scattering bits of snow like ash. Afterward, the men returned to work. That was the celebration. Marcus watched the flag being changed, the old banner lowered, the new one hoisted. The fabric was stiff, the dye faded, but the eagle still gleamed faintly when the light caught it. He thought about how many eagles he'd saluted over the years, how many emperors had come and gone, while he'd stood guard over the same patch of frozen mud. Rome never changed, he thought. Only the names did. That evening, Publius sat beside him by the fire, stirring a pot of stew that smelled more like boiled despair than food. So, Publius said, we've got a new god to pray to. Marcus smirked. He'll need all the prayers he can get. Publius grinned weakly. Think he even knows where Germania is? Marcus shook his head. Maybe on a map, but not here. He gestured around, the crumbling walls, the thin smoke rising into the dusk. Rome likes to forget its edges. Easier that way. The next day, a messenger brought another letter, this one a decree. It listed new taxes, pay adjustments, and something about troop reassignments pending review. The men laughed when they heard it. Pending review, Publius repeated, holding up his hands. Maybe by the time we're skeletons. The centurion didn't laugh. He just said, post it in the hall, and walked away. The parchment hung there for weeks, curling at the edges, until the ink bled from damp air. Marcus sometimes wondered if the emperor even knew how his orders traveled, how they passed from palace scribes to couriers, to lesser officials, to merchants, to soldiers, each step wearing them thinner until they arrived here. Pale ghosts of intent. By the time they reached Germania, the words barely meant anything, just noise, like wind against stone. One night, Marcus dreamed he was in Rome. He walked through the marble halls, armor clinking on polished floors. Senators watched him like he didn't belong, which, of course, he didn't. At the far end of the hall sat the emperor on a golden throne. Marcus bowed. The emperor looked down, eyes calm and empty. "Who are you?" he asked. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The emperor leaned forward. "You're one of mine?" Marcus nodded. The emperor smiled faintly. "Then you've done your duty." And just like that, the dream ended. He woke to the sound of wind scraping the shutters. The golden halls were gone, replaced by the same wooden beams, the same cold. Duty, that word still echoed in his head. By late spring, the news of the emperor was already old. The fort carried on, rebuilding walls, counting rations, pretending the empire still cared. But the river kept flowing, slow and silent, carrying Rome's reflections far away. Marcus found himself thinking less of emperors and more of people, the dead, the living, the ones who'd held the line beside him and vanished into mist. He realized that the empire wasn't marble or banners or decrees. It was them, the forgotten men, the ones who bled and built, who froze and starved, who raised walls in places the emperor would never walk. They were Rome's bones, and like bones, they'd be buried and forgotten, but still holding the weight above them. Soft, reflective music, slow flute, and faint drumbeat like a fading heartbeat. That night, Marcus carved something into the Baroque wall. Just a few words. "The emperor never knew us." Then, after a pause, he added another line. "But we knew Rome." He smiled faintly at that, a quiet, tired smile, and blew out the lamp. Outside, the night wind carried the distant howl of wolves. Rome turned, the empire breathed, and on its frozen edge, Marcus slept, not with pride, not with hope, but with strange, steady peace. Music fades. Last sound, a single flag flapping against the wind. Soft winter wind. Faint crackle of dying embers. A lone heartbeat under slow breathing. The snow came early that year. Thick, heavy flakes drifting down like falling ashes, coating the fort in silence. For once, the place looked almost peaceful, like all the blood and shouting had been buried under white. Marcus stood by the gate, cloak pulled tight, watching the world fade into a pale blur. It had been 15 winters since he'd first come north. 15 years of cold mornings, endless drills, and the same tired faces. He could barely remember the road that brought him here. But he knew one thing for certain now. He couldn't stay. The thought didn't come in one flash. It grew slowly, like frost spreading on glass. Every letter he never sent. Every comrade buried in the frozen ground. Every empty promise from men in marble halls. It all added up to a quiet truth. He was done. He wasn't running from fear. He'd seen too much to fear anything small. He was running toward silence, toward peace. That morning, he packed light, just enough food for a few days, a waterskin, a blanket, and a knife. He left his helmet behind. It had grown too heavy over the years. As he folded his worn red cloak, he hesitated. Then he draped it over his bunk and smoothed the fabric flat. That red was Rome, and he was no longer Rome. The sun hadn't risen yet when he walked across the yard. A few men stirred in their bunks, murmuring in sleep. The air smelled of smoke and damp wool. Marcus passed the barracks door and paused one last time. Inside, the walls were etched with names, men who'd come and gone, most gone. He reached out and traced his own, carved faintly years ago. Marcus Flavius Severus. He smiled. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered to the man he used to be. Then he stepped into the cold. At the gate, the sentry didn't see him, half asleep, head buried in his cloak. Marcus moved quietly, like a shadow among the stones. The gate creaked softly as it opened just enough for one man to slip through. For a heartbeat, he froze, the sound of iron against iron echoing too loud. But no alarm came, and then he was outside. The forest waited dark, still, endless. Each step sank into snow with a soft crunch. The sound felt strangely alive, like the earth was whispering approval. He didn't look back. The fort faded behind him, swallowed by mist and pine. The last outpost of Rome dissolved into the wild. Hours passed. The road ended long ago, replaced by animal tracks and frozen streams. He crossed a ridge where the wind cut sharp, his breath fogging the air. Somewhere in the distance, wolves called. Not threatening, just reminding him he was no longer alone in a Roman world. He smiled faintly. "Good to know someone's awake," he muttered. By midday, he reached a river, the same one he'd guarded for half his life. It flowed slow and black beneath a skin of ice. He remembered when it was a line on a map, a border between civilization and barbarism. Now it was just water, cold, quiet water. He knelt, breaking a thin sheet of ice, and drank. The taste was sharp, clean, real. For the first time in years, he felt like himself. Across the river, the trees grew taller and denser, wild land, untamed and free. He stood at the edge, watching the current drift past. He thought about duty, about old spoken under the sun of another lifetime. And then he thought about all the men who never made it this far, men who died believing the empire would remember them. Marcus knew better. He wasn't betraying Rome. Rome had left him long ago. He stepped into the river. The ice cracked, water biting at his boots, creeping up his legs. Each step forward was a small rebellion. The current tugged at him, gentle but firm, like the hand of the world saying, "Are you sure?" "Yes," he whispered. And with that, he crossed. On the far bank, the snow was untouched. No footprints, no roads, just silence. He stood there for a long time, looking back once, not out of regret, but it marked the place where he ended and began again. The fort was invisible now, lost behind trees and mist. He turned and walked on. As the light faded, he found a small clearing and built a fire. The flames flickered low, warming his hands. He roasted a scrap of bread and smiled. It tasted better than any feast he'd had under Rome's banners. Above, the stars shone brighter than he remembered. Maybe they always had. He'd just been too busy following orders to look up. He thought about what lay ahead. Maybe he'd find a village among the tribes. Maybe he'd just keep walking. Either way, he wasn't afraid. Somewhere beyond the empire's reach, he'd find peace. Not in marble halls or triumphs, but in quiet mornings, in open skies, in simply being alive. Before sleeping, he took a small coin from his pouch, one of the old emperor's faces, worn smooth by time. He turned it over in the firelight. The man on the coin smiled that same distant smile every emperor seemed to wear, the kind that looked at you without seeing. Marcus tossed it into the fire. The metal hissed, flared, then was gone. Soft sound of wind. Crackle fades to steady breath. He lay back, eyes half closed, the warmth of the fire brushing his face. For the first time in years, There were no orders to follow, no walls to guard, no banners to salute, just the quiet of the forest and the rhythm of his heart. He whispered, almost laughing, "So this is what freedom sounds like." Somewhere far behind him, the Roman flag still flapped against the wind. But out here, the wind was his own. And as the snow fell softer, gentler, the last soldier of Rome closed his eyes, not in defeat but in peace. Music fades, just wind, crackling fire, and the faint beat of silence. Soft morning sounds, birds creaking wood, a stream trickling nearby, the faint rhythm of a hoe turning soil. Spring came slow, like a patient visitor. The snow melted in small, hesitant patches, revealing dark soil underneath. The forest woke, creaking, stretching, breathing. Marcus had been living among them for months now. The tribe beyond the river, people the empire once called savages. They weren't. They were farmers, hunters, mothers, and children. They laughed loud, worked hard, and slept soundly. They took him in when they could have left him to the wolves. He'd stumbled into their camp half-frozen, barely speaking. They could have turned him away. Instead, an old woman gave him broth, and a boy offered him fire. He remembered little after that. Fevered dreams, whispered words he didn't understand, and faces peering down with cautious kindness. When he finally woke fully, he wasn't a Roman anymore. He was just Marcus. Life here was simple, and that was what made it feel so strange. Days were filled with work, tending goats, repairing fences, planting barley. No orders, no drills, no salutes, only rhythm, the soft chop of wood, the crunch of boots in earth, the laughter of children chasing chickens through the mud. He found peace in it, a peace Rome never gave. One morning, he stood by the river with a wooden pail, watching his reflection ripple. His beard had gone gray. His face was weathered, but his eyes were calm. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a man. The tribe's elder, a wiry man named Halvard, once asked him, "Do you miss your city?" Marcus thought about it. The stone roads, the endless noise, the smell of iron and oil. He shook his head. "I miss people more than places." Halvard nodded. "Then you're home enough." The children loved his armor. What was left of it, anyway? A dented breastplate, a rusted gladius, and a handful of coins he hadn't burned. They'd ask, "You were a Roman warrior?" Marcus would chuckle. "Once. Mostly I was just tired." That always made them giggle. Sometimes he told them stories, not about battles or emperors, but about olive trees and sunny roads, about the warmth of the southern wind. They listened wide-eyed, as if he were speaking of another world, and in truth, he was. At night, the tribe gathered around the fire. They sang in rough voices, songs that rose and fell like the wind. Marcus didn't know the words, but he hummed along, keeping the rhythm with his hands. In those moments, he felt something close to belonging, not because they saw him as one of them, but because they didn't need to. They accepted the quiet man who worked hard, smiled little, and fixed things that broke. That was enough. Sometimes, when the air was still, he thought of the fort, the walls, the gates, the men's laughter echoing down cold halls. He wondered if anyone had noticed he was gone. Maybe they'd written his name in a report. Marcus Flavius Severus, deserter. Maybe no one had. Either way, he was fine with it. He wasn't running anymore. He was living. Summer came, and the forest turned green and thick with life. He built a small hut by the edge of a meadow with his own hands, rough, uneven, but strong. Every morning he walked the fields, checking the barley, listening to the bees hum around wildflowers. Sometimes he caught himself smiling for no reason at all. It felt strange. That smiling could feel like bravery. One afternoon, the young boy who'd once offered him fire asked, "Were you afraid when you crossed the river?" Marcus thought for a moment. "I was," he said, "but I was more afraid of staying." The boy nodded slowly, though he didn't really understand. Marcus smiled and ruffled his hair. "One day you will." As months rolled by, the people stopped calling him the Roman. He was just Marcus, the man who mended roofs, who helped a harvest, who always shared his bread. He even picked up their tongue, slowly, clumsily, but enough to laugh at their jokes and tell his own. It was odd to belong without having to prove anything. Rome had demanded loyalty. Here, they just wanted kindness. One evening, Halvard sat beside him by the fire. "You came here alone," the old man said, "but you don't seem lonely anymore." Marcus stared into flames. "Maybe I learned that peace isn't something you find in orders or gods or cities. It's just where you stop running." Halvard grinned. "Then you stopped well." They clinked their wooden cups together. Meat spilled on the dirt. Neither cared. As autumn returned, the air grew sharp again. The sky turned the color of brass. Marcus looked out across the valley, the fields, the river, the forest beyond. He felt something he hadn't felt in decades, gratitude. Not for victory, not for glory, just for being alive here in this quiet corner of the world. Sometimes, when he walked by the children playing near the river, he'd see them balancing sticks like spears, shouting for Rome. Just to tease him, he'd laugh, shaking his head. "Rome's too far away," he'd say. "Here we fight for dinner." That line always got a cheer. One evening, sitting by his hut, he picked up a scrap of parchment, one of the old letters he'd never sent. The ink had faded, but he could still read the start. "Mother, I am well." He smiled faintly and folded it again. Then he tossed it into fire. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash, floating up into night air, carried by the same wind that once carried his dreams of Rome. Soft music, flute, gentle drums, the crackle of a hearth. The fire burned low. Around him, the tribe slept, their laughter still echoing faintly through the huts. Marcus looked at the stars, the same ones he'd watched over the Rhine, only now they felt closer. He whispered to the night, "I'm not forgotten." And for the first time, he truly believed it. Soft wind through tall grass. A lone bird calls in the distance. The faint creak of old wood. Time has a way of swallowing everything. The river still runs, but slower now. Its banks wider, its song softer. The forest has grown thick again, covering the scars of men and their empires. And Marcus, old and gray, walks its edge with a staff in hand, his step steady but slow. He has seen 60 winters since he first crossed this river, 60 turns of frost and bloom, of life unfolding in circles. The tribe's children have grown. The names he once knew have become stories told by fireside. And the fort, that proud, stony monument of Rome, is gone. He visits it sometimes, when the air is clear and the light bends gold through the trees. The walls are nothing now but mounds of moss and broken stone. The gate he once slipped through stands half buried, its timbers rotted, the iron hinges fused by rust. He stops there, leaning on his staff, and smiles faintly. "So," he murmurs, "you finally fell asleep too." He steps through what used to be the yard, weeds taller than a man, wildflowers pushing through cracks. He can still picture it. Soldiers drilling, smoke rising from cook fires, the sound of boots and laughter and orders shouted into the wind. Now there's only birdsong, and somehow that feels right. Marcus kneels near what once was a barracks. He brushes aside the leaves, finds a faint mark on a stone, the edge of a carving. He squints, traces it with trembling fingers. It's a name, his name, Marcus Flavius Severus. Barely visible now, half-eaten by time. He laughs softly, not sad, not proud, just peaceful. "Still here," he says. "Didn't think you'd last this long." The sun slips behind the trees, painting the ruins in amber light. He sits on a fallen beam, the same place where he once stood guard, younger, harder, still believing Rome would remember him. Now he knows better. Empires don't remember. People do. And most people, sooner or later, forget. He takes out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, a handful of barley seeds. He scatters them gently into the wind, letting them fall among the ruins. Grow, he whispers. Turn the walls green. The seeds catch the light, tumbling through the air before disappearing into the soil. A fitting end for a soldier who became a farmer. He watches the forest breathe. The slow sway of branches, the hum of insects, the soft rustle of life reclaiming stone. For centuries, the empire sent men like him to tame the edges of the world. But the edges always outlasted the center. The forests waited. The rivers waited. And when Rome finally cracked, the wild came back, gentle and patient as sleep. He thinks of the emperor's face on that coin he once burned, smooth, untouched, eternal. He wonders if any of them ever saw what their borders looked like after banners fell. If they ever imagined their proud eagles sinking quietly into mud and moss. Marcus chuckles. Maybe it's better they didn't. He tilts his head back, looking at the sky, the same endless blue he once watched from ramparts, only now without weight, without command. The sun lowers. The ruins glow for a brief, golden moment, then dim. Marcus closes his eyes and listens. The wind hums through the trees. The river murmurs. Somewhere far off, a wolf calls, not as a threat, but as a song. He breathes it all in, slow and steady. This, he whispers, is the sound of Rome ending. Then he smiles, and the world beginning again. Night creeps in soft and kind. The stars appear one by one, quiet sentinels watching from above. He lays his staff beside him and leans back against the stone. His breath is shallow, calm. He's not afraid. He's not waiting for orders. He's just listening to the river, the trees, the silence that follows every great empire. A silence not of death, but of rest. Somewhere, fireflies begin to rise, tiny sparks dancing over the ruins, glowing like the ghosts of campfires long gone. For a moment, Marcus almost hears the past, the laughter of soldiers, the clang of steel, the murmur of voices in Latin. He smiles faintly. Still here, he murmurs, all of you. Then the sounds fade again, leaving only the night. The forest exhales. The river glows faintly under moonlight, winding past the ruins like a silver thread through time. And Marcus Flavius Severus, once a soldier of Rome, sits perfectly still, an old man surrounded by everything he once feared, now at peace within it. Soft, final music, flute, distant horns, then fading wind. Centuries later, the forest will grow thicker. Travelers will pass these ruins without knowing their name. A shepherd might find an old coin. A child might play among the stones. And maybe on a quiet night, someone will swear they hear voices. The crackle of a campfire, the whisper of Latin prayers. But they'll be wrong. It's not ghosts. It's just the earth remembering. The empire is gone. The borders are gone. But the man, the quiet, forgotten soldier, has become part of the land itself. And in the end, that's what lasts. Music fades completely. Only the river remains, soft, endless, eternal.